the idea of trying to make yourself stand out as a candidate who has gone a little bit beyond everyone else, who is really kind of being able to demonstrate their motivations and their enthusiasm for whatever industry they're interested in by networking and putting themselves out there and leveraging that information provision they're getting from others, is absolutely critical, and is certainly a really big component of what I think will make a successful candidate sort of going forward, really.
I'm Sullivan, and I'm the host of Gen Z Talks. And today we're going to be focusing on the topic of networking, specifically networking for students, graduates, and young professionals. And we're very delighted to be joined today by someone who's been heavily involved in helping Generation Z, providing networking tips through his blogs and through his ever-growing podcast, More From Law. He's also a trainee solicitor, and he's been helping people not just in law, but also inspiring other people from other sectors through useful advice and positive content. So I'd like to welcome Harry Clark.
Thank you. Very flattering intro. Thanks for the invitation for having me here, Dan. Thanks.
Maybe you can give us a bit more detail about your background and your story so far.
Yeah, for sure. So, like you say, I'm a sort of trainee at Baker's, and for the last sort of year or so, I've been making resources, be it posting on social media or ebooks, and most recently with the podcast, More From Law, as you mentioned, trying to help kind of aspiring and even junior practicing lawyers learn a little bit more about the profession, and essentially passing on all of the kind of goodwill advice and everything else which has been passed on to me through my network. So I got started with all this about 12 months ago. I just recently graduated from the University of York with my law degree, and I had sort of somewhere in the region of like 4 to 5 months as an in-between of limbo between doing graduating from university and then moving on to the LPC and law school. And it was that sort of time of year when people were starting to get acceptances and rejections for training contract applications, which is one of the more sort of common graduate roles that people apply for within the world of law. And I was also looking to delete some space from my phone. It just kind of, the two things kind of happened together. And I opened up this app, LinkedIn. I never really used it before. It was more of a sort of digital CV for me. And I saw, quite understandably, a lot of people posting happy to have received this and delighted to have accepted this and so on during that sort of time of year when that was sort of correlating. And I just remember I being in the same position of, say, 6 to 12 months ago, reading all those posts and thinking that was really indicative of the entire job market, and thinking that you were the only one who didn't get something and so on. So just sort of made a short post on that basis and gave a few points and offered to speak to anyone who wanted some advice. And it went crazy. It went viral. It was real amazing to see the sort of the thirst for people to learn from others and to kind of really share their knowledge in that way. And then it sort of evolved over time of everything I've been doing, starting with speaking to people on a sort of one-to-one basis, and then writing my blog, developing more long-form content, and then obviously evolving through the podcast and everything else I've been doing to date. So it's been a real pleasure, because it's been a real two-way experience. I've been able to try and help save people making the same mistakes that I made, and there are a lot of them throughout the whole process. And admittedly, it's a lot different to everything else that students and others might have been aware from before. And at the same time, I've had the ability to speak to people from all over the world, had the ability to engage with students, with partners, with more senior lawyers in a really engaging way, and to really get a feel for what they're all about, and the kind of passions they have, and the sort of thinking about the ways that we can sort of disseminate information to this specific generation in a way which is going to be really accessible and kind of meeting them where they are, really.
So what inspired you, Harry, to actually kind of work so closely with this new generation coming through into the workforce, Generation Z?
I think one of the reasons that I've really enjoyed working with students and kind of Generation Z now, for example, is the fact that I was in that exact age group and that exact sort of category, and I probably am on the sort of upper echelon of what would be considered Gen Z only a few years ago. So when I'm asking myself the question of, well, what would I have really wanted as a resource, and how am I going to try and build that? I think back to my own personal experiences and the experiences of my peers and cohort, because I'm able to hopefully try and reflect on the ways that I used to enjoy, learning new things, or at least talking in a way which is nice and accessible, and I can understand some of, not all of, but some of the challenges and misconceptions and things that I was experiencing at that age. And so it was a real pleasure just to sort of try and create that that sort of dynamic and that resource to help people in that way, because it really connected with me and where I was a few years ago. And then beyond that as well, I think just looking at the way that Gen Z and other younger generations are kind of interacting with content and interacting with sort of information provision, it's really different from the ways I think that traditionally law firms and other companies have been marketing and kind of providing that information anyway. So, traditionally pre-COVID, everyone was going to these law fairs and career services, and firms would come in and deliver these lectures for hours. And I feel, to me, again, my own personal opinion, but that seemed like such an inherently unfriendly kind of way of pitching to students, because what kind of student's going to agree to just sort of sit for an hour or two and listen to a presentation when they could get that exact same information either in a virtual capacity like we've seen with all of these webinars, live streams, and much more kind of interactive sort of content, or through something like a podcast, which is sort of more digestible, more laid back, and I guess just sort of less formal and sort of more interactive in that sense as well. So yeah, I think that's probably sort of the two reasons why it's been so enjoyable and so much fun to see this as a sort of challenge, and to keep trying to find new ways to engage with this sort of group of people.
How important is networking now for the younger generation? And what's the best way for them to network? What kind of platforms can Gen Z use to be able to build relationships which will help them in their career?
Yeah, I think to address the point quickly, I think it's really critical. And I'd say it's for a reason which it's not for a reason I used to believe. I used to believe that the whole idea of networking was you would sort of schmooze your way to the job. You'd turn up at the careers fair and ask that killer question and make an impression, and then they'd remember the name on the training contract. And that element, application, I understand there's an element of that, but I think the much more useful side of networking, and the one which is going to put a lot less pressure on yourself and is one that's just going to be much more enjoyable, it's just the idea of information provision. So, before I started doing all this, I had a pretty narrow idea of what commercial law was, let alone, in terms of the topics, let alone the people who are working within the profession and the different types of roles and everything else. And what I've experienced in speaking to so many different people and so many different backgrounds in different jurisdictions and different practice areas, different roles and so on, it's just the breadth of everything that I didn't know, and the kind of challenging my own conceptions of what I thought I knew, and learning in that experience. So I think certainly if you're looking at a key reason why, I think just basic information provision and being able to hopefully build either some kind of mentoring relationship or simply just to learn something from someone else is a really critical component of networking. And as you say, given the really weird times we find ourselves in, I think that kind of stuff is absolutely invaluable. I think trying to learn about ways that, for example, people who were in the 2008 recession or crash, how they sort of shared their experiences of how they went through the graduate job market, and how things worked out for them in terms of how they're developing their career, learning from the different routes and access points into the profession or your given industry is another example, and just generally trying to sort of challenge your own conceptions or the way you thought you'd have to do things, I think is paramount, because especially in this current job market, that sense of flexibility and trying to upskill yourself and trying to develop your knowledge beyond just what you're being taught in the classroom as a way to try and sort of stand out from the competition is going to be really, really critical, because, well, for one, all of those in-person events and other things as well are going to be shut down, and two, it's going to be very competitive cycles for graduate roles for the next few years. There's no hiding that, especially if places and accesses to certain schemes are being deferred in certain industries or in certain positions. That could theoretically double the number of applicants who are going to apply for them when they do reopen, because you're going to have people who will have waited a year before entering them. So I think the idea of trying to make yourself stand out as a candidate who has gone a little bit beyond everyone else, who is really kind of being able to demonstrate their motivations and their enthusiasm for whatever industry they're interested in by networking and putting themselves out there and leveraging that information provision they're getting from others, is absolutely critical, and is certainly a really big component of what I think will make a successful candidate sort of going forward, really.
How do you approach networking with older generations? And how can you come across the best, and what can you offer in terms of, do you just be authentic, or do you look deep inside your skills, and maybe you've got social media skills and something you can exchange? What do you see is the best way you can kind of have value to give for the person you're reaching out and connecting with?
Sure. So just on that point of kind of what can younger generations do for, say, more senior or more experienced people. If all anything, I think it's two things. It's skills and it's perspective. So on the skill side of things, especially Gen Z, this is a generation who has grown up, with technology, or at least seen it sort of develop throughout their childhood and growing up in that way. And I think naturally, as a result of that, they are going to understand social media platforms and how tech functions and the kind of ins and outs of the internet a bit more than people who are sort of, say, your average more experienced or more senior person within a given organization. And that's really important because ultimately that's the way that I think nearly all businesses are going to be heading, is just expanding continuously into that digital space, especially with something like COVID, where it's almost been effectively mandated by the government through lockdowns and people have to sit at home and work in that sense. So I think certainly the natural skills and the comfortability and the adaptability you will have developed, even just to a minor degree of interacting with technology as you've grown up, will be a huge advantage compared to someone who say entered the legal profession when they're still using handwritten letters and typing pools and everything else, and it's now the case where people are kind of conferencing over Zoom and all that kind of stuff. So certainly the kind of skills in that sense. And the second is perspective, if not least just for a marketing perspective, and that companies and firms are going to be looking to recruit the next generation of partners and more senior management people into their organization. And in order to do that, they need to resonate with the younger generation now. And if you are within an organization, you recently entered it, or you're looking to, you're going to have a lot of perspective and understanding about what it is that you enjoy and the kind of ways that you consume information and the ways we've sort of been talking about. And that kind of information is going to be really invaluable, because that's going to help the business make their decision in terms of how they're going to go about marketing, what's going to resonate, what's not, what are the sort of key questions they're asking, and sort of more general questions about sort of generations as a whole, like what are their sort of key USPs or key things that they're really looking for in an organization, what are the do's and don'ts of their ideal role. So yeah, I think certainly from a perspective and your own, even if it's just your own anecdotal experiences, you can certainly share your insights there, and then hopefully you'll have more of a sort of ability and willingness to adapt to new skills, and especially those focused in the tech and digital space as well, which again is going to be invaluable. So don't underestimate the importance of kind of reverse mentoring and being able to share your experiences as someone who is quote unquote more junior as a result of experience or age or anything else, and being able to pass that on to others in an organization or anything else.
What's your advice to Generation Z who are getting rejected from jobs, especially at the moment? How do they stay positive? How do they kind of keep going, stay motivated? And are there any tips you can give them to increase their chances of applications?
Yeah, good insight. I think you're absolutely right. It's the thing that no one really wants to talk about, but is there for everyone, and more people are starting to be more open about it today, which I think is fantastic. I think, unfortunately, it's a bit of a catch-22. I remember being in university, and it's incredibly easy and appealing to compare yourself to other people, and to think that the fact that Joe sat across from you has managed to do X by the time that he's the same age as you, therefore means you're instantly sort of lesser in some way, or to kind of have this sort of me versus everyone else kind of thinking. And it's a lot easier said than done. But if you don't either ditch or mitigate that and kind of reason and rationalize it, it can be incredibly damaging both to your motivations and your ability to sort of bounce back from rejection and everything else. So whilst it's a lot easier said than done, I think it's better to focus on your own journey, and to kind of focus on what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, and to kind of focus on your own improvements you're trying to make, versus comparing yourself to where everyone else is today and everything else they're doing. And one of the best ways that I tried to do it, I sort of employed sort of two tactics. The first was actually not to think of this as a motivation question. So my own kind of opinion of motivation is that it's very short term, and it kind of relates to how you wake up out of bed on the one day in the morning. It could be that you wake up one week and you just have a natural burst of energy, and you're able to complete all your projects and everything you're doing today, and you might make some really great progress in that 1 or 2 week period with regards to your own personal goals or something that you're doing within work, or obviously applications and academics and everything else. But that sort of burst and that kind of moment of energy isn't sustainable, and it's not the case that you can do that for 6 to 7 months in a way which would kind of really transform everything you're doing and kind of really transform your growth. And so I think that the main thing to focus on is the little things. It's your habits. It's the fact that a lot of everything that we do is automated in terms of our own sort of decision making and kind of the responses to our environment around us. And if you really want to see change and you really want to kind of develop a bit of a career plan and move forward, I think you have to keep that in mind and to curate a bit of a sort of review of your current habits and current lifestyle, and to find a way to sort of replace all those negative ones with positive habits to sort of keep you going, and to really sort of optimize your own sort of daily routine and everything else. So I think that's certainly one thing which will help with regards to giving yourself more time and making yourself more productive. And the second was to try to find some kind of value from a rejection in any capacity. So like you say, a lot of these applications are really competitive, and it's not uncommon for recruiters to get thousands of applications for X amount of positions. And so it's very difficult to get personalized written feedback, just because from an administrative perspective that it's not feasible and it's not possible in that sense. So certainly if you get through to later stages, ask for feedback. But obviously for people who don't, I think you have to try to take things into your own hands to some degree. So first and foremost, recognize that especially for the most written sort of stages of applications, you could miss the mark, so to speak, on getting through to the next stage by 1%, or you could completely blow the lid off and have got it entirely wrong, and you'll still get that same standardized rejection email of there's a lot of candidates this year of very high caliber quality, and so on and so on. So one of the things that I started to do between my sort of second and third application cycle, when I my academics and my experience didn't actually change much, but my approach did, was to actually go through my old applications and get someone like my parents or someone in my family, or even my other peers who were, say, interested in law but interested in other aspects of it, say family or anything else, to have a read through and to try to find ways to critique what I was doing and to check if I'd missed anything. A lot of applications and things that I've read when mentoring for others, it's the really basic stuff which can hold you back. It's writing style, it's how you're structuring your answers, it's actually answering the question that the recruiter is asking you. Those are all really simple points and really simple to fix. But if you are not, if you're so kind of focused on your own writing style and you're not trying to seek others to give you a third opinion, or to at least make a comparative reflection and review on what you've been doing in the past, it can be hard to break that habit, and you might find yourself sort of stuck in a cycle of everything you're doing. So I'd certainly recommend those sort of two outlets as ways to hopefully turn something as let's face it, nasty as a rejection into something of value and utility that will kind of help you going forward.
Excellent. Thanks, Harry. Thanks for your time, and all the best in the future.
My pleasure. And to you, Dan, thanks for having me.